The announcement of a $14 billion grain deal between Burkina Faso under the leadership of Captain Ibrahim Traoré and the government of India has sent shockwaves through global markets, political institutions, and international media. Few could have anticipated such a partnership of this scale between a small West African country and one of the world's largest emerging economies. Yet this deal represents more than just the exchange of food commodities. It signals the arrival of a new era in global trade, one where Africa is not merely a supplier of raw materials, but a strategic partner shaping the world economy. The implications of this agreement ripple across continents, drawing both praise and anxiety from different corners of the globe. When the news first broke, analysts were stunned by the sheer size of the agreement. $14 billion is no minor trade partnership. For Burkina Faso, a nation historically marginalized in global finance, this represents one of the largest deals in its modern history. For India, it secures long-term grain supplies at a time when global food security is increasingly fragile due to climate change, supply chain disruptions, and ongoing geopolitical conflicts. To many observers, this move illustrates the way developing nations are now collaborating with each other, sidestepping the traditional dominance of Western powers in structuring global trade. The details of the agreement reveal how deeply it can alter the balance of power in the agricultural sector. India, with its massive population and growing food demand, has always been vulnerable to fluctuations in agricultural production. While India remains a major agricultural producer itself, its dependency on external supplies during bad harvest years has grown. Partnering with Burkina Faso ensures access to high-quality grain produced in Africa's fertile fields, particularly as Traoré's government has prioritized massive investments into farming, irrigation systems, mechanized agriculture, and export-focused grain production. For Burkina Faso, this deal is not only about economics, it is about dignity and sovereignty. For decades, African nations were compelled to trade primarily through frameworks designed by former colonial powers or by institutions like the World Bank and IMF that came with strings attached. Traoré's administration has consistently emphasized breaking free from dependency and asserting a new Africa-first strategy in both politics and trade. This deal with India exemplifies that vision. It demonstrates that African nations can negotiate on equal terms, securing vast sums of investment and trade without being trapped in exploitative arrangements. The political symbolism cannot be overstated. By choosing India as a partner, Traoré is making a statement to the West that Africa is not bound to its traditional alignments. India, a member of the BRICS alliance, is increasingly seen as a counterweight to Western hegemony. The alignment of Burkina Faso with such a partner indicates that the shift toward multipolarity is accelerating. It sends a message that Africa will choose its partners strategically, based on mutual benefit, rather than out of obligation or coercion. Global reactions have been swift and varied. Across Africa, there is widespread celebration of this deal as a model for how smaller nations can leverage their natural and agricultural resources for massive gain. Governments in Mali, Niger, and other African states aligned with Burkina Faso's vision have praised Traoré for his boldness and negotiating skills. The deal is being framed as an example of Pan-African strength, where nations no longer submit to the role of subordinate exporters, but instead become indispensable suppliers on their own terms in the West. However, the response has been far more cautious and, in some circles, even alarmed. Western media outlets quickly began questioning the sustainability of the deal, pointing to Burkina Faso's internal security challenges and ongoing counterterrorism campaigns. But beneath these critiques lies a deeper anxiety, the realization that Western influence over Africa's trade is slipping away. The grain deal illustrates how Africa is not only diversifying its partners, but also redirecting the flow of strategic resources away from Western capitals. For Europe, which has historically depended on African grain and agricultural imports, this shift presents a challenge to its food security planning. India's motivations also deserve attention. The Indian government has faced immense pressure to ensure affordable food supplies for its population of over 1.4 billion people. Climate events like floods, heat waves, and irregular monsoons have threatened domestic crop yields, making imports more vital. The deal with Burkina Faso is not just about grain, it is about stability. India has effectively secured a long-term guarantee against supply shocks by locking in a major African partner. At the same time, India deepens its political influence in Africa, countering both Western and Chinese initiatives on the continent. Observers note that this deal also has an important technological and developmental dimension. As part of the agreement, India is expected to invest in grain storage facilities, irrigation infrastructure, and logistic systems within Burkina Faso. This means that beyond the immediate financial windfall, Burkina Faso will benefit from long-term infrastructure that strengthens its agricultural resilience. The building of grain silos, processing plants, and transport corridors can create tens of thousands of jobs for Burkinabe citizens, while positioning the country as a regional hub for agricultural exports. The social implications within Burkina Faso are immense. For decades, many Burkinabe farmers lived in subsistence conditions, vulnerable to climate change and market instability. Traoré's agricultural vision, coupled with deals of this magnitude, provides them with a sense of stability and purpose. Rural communities that have often been marginalized in national economic planning are now at the center of an international trade revolution. This could reduce poverty levels dramatically, while also encouraging young people to see farming not as a dead-end occupation, but as a viable and respected career path. The ripple effects across Africa are just as significant. Other countries are watching Burkina Faso's success closely. Mali, Niger, Guinea, and other states aligned with Traoré's political vision are likely to pursue similar agreements with rising global powers, whether with India, China, or Middle Eastern partners. The message is clear. Africa's resources and agricultural capacity are in high demand, and by uniting strategically, African countries can leverage these assets for maximum gain. Western strategists now face a dilemma. On the one hand, criticizing these deals too aggressively risks alienating African governments even further, pushing them into the arms of BRICS-aligned nations. On the other hand, ignoring them risks conceding influence over critical supply chains. There is already talk in European capitals about launching counteroffers or reviving trade initiatives aimed at winning back African partners. But for many Africans, trust in Western promises has eroded after decades of structural adjustment policies, exploitative trade terms, and political interference. What makes this deal even more symbolic is the timing. As global food prices rise and shortages become more common due to conflicts like the war in Ukraine, nations are scrambling to secure their own food supplies. India's bet on Burkina Faso is a recognition that Africa's role in the global food system is no longer peripheral, but central. The world is waking up to the reality that African nations, long dismissed as dependent, are in fact essential to solving the crises of the 21st century. For Traoré himself, this agreement solidifies his reputation as one of Africa's boldest leaders. His ability to command respect on the global stage, negotiate billion-dollar deals, and reframe the narrative of African development distinguishes him from many of his predecessors. Where previous leaders were often accused of signing away national wealth in exchange for short-term gains, Traoré is praised for securing a deal that directly benefits both the state and its citizens. His popularity within Burkina Faso is likely to soar even further as people witness tangible benefits from his policies. Internationally, the deal strengthens the argument that the world is moving toward a multipolar order. The dominance of Western institutions is steadily eroding, replaced by a network of South-South partnerships. India's outreach to Burkina Faso and Traoré's willingness to embrace it illustrates this trend perfectly. The balance of global trade is no longer dictated solely by Washington, London, or Brussels. It is now being shaped in capitals like New Delhi, Ouagadougou, and Brasilia. Even the symbolism of the commodities involved should not be overlooked. Grain represents life, stability, and survival. By turning grain into the centerpiece of a $14 billion deal, Traoré and India are emphasizing the primacy of human needs over purely extractive industries like oil or minerals. This elevates agriculture to its rightful place as the foundation of both national sovereignty and international diplomacy. The deal also hints at potential future collaborations. Beyond grain, Burkina Faso and India may expand cooperation into energy, mining, technology, and defense. Already, Indian companies have shown interest in Africa's mining sectors, and Burkina Faso's mineral wealth could be the next frontier of collaboration. Likewise, Indian expertise in pharmaceuticals and digital technology could be deployed in Burkina Faso, further strengthening ties between the two nations. Meanwhile, global markets are adjusting to the shock. Commodity traders have scrambled to recalculate supply chains, while analysts debate whether this signals a long-term reordering of agricultural trade. Many expect other African nations to follow Burkina Faso's example, leading to a wave of new agreements that will steadily reduce Western dominance in the sector. Ultimately, this $14 billion deal represents far more than the exchange of grain. It is a geopolitical earthquake. It signals the end of Africa's passive role in global trade and the beginning of its emergence as a decisive actor. It demonstrates that the new generation of African leaders, exemplified by Traoré, will no longer accept the old frameworks of dependency and exploitation. And it proves that the world, from India to Europe to the United States, must now reckon with Africa not as a peripheral continent, but as a central pillar of global stability and growth. As celebrations continue in Burkina Faso and as policymakers in India tout the success of their negotiations, the rest of the world watches closely. For the West, this is a wake-up call that the age of unchallenged dominance is over. For Africa, it is an affirmation that the continent holds the keys to its own destiny. And for the people of Burkina Faso, it is a historic moment when their nation stepped onto the global stage as an equal partner, reshaping the narrative of Africa for generations to come. In the years ahead, historians may look back on this moment not merely as a trade agreement, but as a turning point. The day Burkina Faso and India signed a $14 billion grain deal could be remembered as the day Africa declared to the world that it would chart its own course, forge its own alliances, and claim its rightful place at the center of global affairs.